Neural, now that a bear in Canada broke into a truck and drank 69 cans of different sodas but would not touch the diet soda. Authorities must return this bear to America because he's obviously an American bear. Well, he won't drink diet soda. He sleeps half the year, and he shows up at Walmart not wearing any pants.
Good morning. It is Sunday. Thank God it's Sunday, April the 30th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Star-Spangled Banner and the Serenity Prayer, we will have no free lunch, brinksmanship, mass murder, and bishop-barron. All that and more when I come back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Socialism. The champions of socialism call themselves progressives, but they recommend a system which is characterized by rigid observance of routine and by a resistance to every kind of improvement. They call themselves liberals, but they're intent upon abolishing liberty. They call themselves Democrats, but they yearn for dictatorship. They call themselves revolutionaries, but they want to make the government omnipotent. They promise the blessings of the Garden of Eden, but they plan to transform the world into a gigantic post office. Every man but one, a subordinate clerk in a bureau. Ludwig von Mises. The fatal mistake many defenders of free markets and classical liberalism make is they grant the premises so many socialists make, even as they offer counter-conclusions. At its core, socialism is not a well-intentioned belief system that simply lacks efficiency or follow-through. The internal contradictions in its belief system are numerous, and the disastrous conclusions that come out of it are a result of its foundations, not despite its foundations.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Good, thank you. So, Wall Street Journal with Jerry Baker here on Sunday, and they're talking about the budget, and the House has sent their budget to, actually it's the debt ceiling bill to the Senate, and the majority leader or the speaker says, we did our job, in essence. Okay, now it's up to the Senate and the President of the United States and all this. But what this really is, this has nothing, it doesn't matter what's in the bill, it's all brinksmanship. This is the way it has worked out since the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Democrat Party has set itself up as the party of irresponsibility, as opposed to the Republicans, who are considered the party of responsibility. So in other words, if you look at this like parents, then the Democrat Party is the irresponsible parent that always tells the children, yes. Can I have ice cream for dinner? Sure. And leaves it to the responsible parent to be the one to say, no, you can't. You're going to have to eat your vegetables first, then you can have dessert. And then, of course, the kids get mad and throw a temper tantrum. And so the responsible parent becomes very unpopular. The irresponsible parent becomes popular. And there you go. And that's the dynamic we have going with these two particular parties. Now, and it works for the Democrats every time because they just play brinksmanship. They say, you're going to give us our way, or we'll let the debt blow up. And the Republicans, being the party of responsibility, well, they can't have that. They can't do that. So when push comes to shove, they blink. The Democrats get their way. And this happens over and over and over again. What's the solution? The Republicans have to put themselves in a position of taking the risk of being seen as a party that's just as irresponsible as the Democrats. The Republicans have to say, in essence, through action, okay, you want to play this game, we're going to play. Okay, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling unless you do it our way. We don't, and if the debt ceiling doesn't get raised, too bad. You're the one that's going to take the blame for it. And now what's going to happen is then the Democrats are now going to be forced to either decide to allow the debt ceiling to be not to be raised and to default on our debts, or be the responsible party, start negotiating, and make some limits, and put some limits on things, and be responsible. That's the only way you're going to do it. It's a psychological game, and the Republicans are going to have to get tough psychologically in order to defeat it. And if the Republicans can do this at least once, then there's the very good, strong possibility that the Democrats won't play this game anymore. And they'll sit down and start acting like responsible adults and negotiate from the very beginning. Back in a minute. Thank you. And so there was two more violent crimes that took place over the weekend. One of them was in apparently just north of Houston, in which 5 people were murdered, and the murderer is on the loose. Okay, 5 people were murdered. Apparently this man was out in his front yard making noise and shooting his AR-15, and the people next door asked him to stop doing that because their baby was asleep. So he went next door into their house and murdered 5 people. So he's on the loose. There was also apparently overnight here in the LA area a party that was going on, and 2 people were murdered there. But these are murders. Again, if we keep talking about this, and we're going to hear it tomorrow from all the Republican talk show hosts, they're all going to call it gun violence. Every single one of them. They're stupid, they're wrong, and they need to knock it off. The only thing that's going to come from continuing to refer to something as gun violence is violation of the Second Amendment. That's the only thing we can expect. Because logically, the only solution for gun violence is to take away people's guns. Okay, if we refer to it with what it is, which is a crime, criminal activity, there's lots of different solutions for solving crime. Okay, so that would be increasing the number of police officers, having more aggressive prosecutions, longer sentences, etc. And that's a winner for Republicans and conservatives. So referring to it as gun violence is a loser for everybody in the United States of America. Don't forget it. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, 13 minutes of Bishop-barron.
Peace be with you. Friends, we come to this third Sunday of Easter, and our gospel is what N.T. Wright calls the masterpiece within the masterpiece. He means the whole 24th chapter of Luke is a masterpiece, but within that, we find this account of the disciples on the road to Emmaus. And it's a masterpiece for all kinds of reasons, but I think basically because it's a summation of the spiritual life. I mean, you can read all the dynamics of the spiritual life off of this story. Look how it starts. On that first day of the week, 2 disciples of Jesus are walking to a village 7 miles from Jerusalem called Emmaus. Everything in Luke moves toward Jerusalem. That's where the action is. That's where the cross and resurrection take place. That's where the coming of the Spirit is. Everything moves toward Jerusalem. Jesus sets his face toward Jerusalem. So these 2 disciples are walking the wrong way. That's the point we're meant to see. And again, everybody, we're meant to identify with them. They stand for all of us disciples of Jesus who nevertheless keep getting it wrong. We keep walking away from where we should be going. Here's the good news, though. Even though they're walking the wrong way, Jesus comes and walks with them, though they don't recognize him. You know, several things here, but it's that primacy of grace, which I talk about all the time because you could say it's the master theme of the Bible. It's not as though we have to perform adequately to get God to love us. That's just the wrong logic in the spiritual order. Rather, even when we're walking the wrong way, Jesus comes and walks with us. You know, and also these great themes in Pope Francis come to mind here. The Pope keeps emphasizing accompaniment. That's what this is. They don't have to perform to get him to accompany them. Jesus simply comes and he walks with them. And then with this kind of delicious irony, Jesus himself says, well, hey, what are you talking about as you go? What I love here is it's a template, I think, for anyone involved in the work of the church. What will never work very well? If we simply start pontificating from on high, we simply start wagging the finger morally at people. That almost never works. The first step, which is an invitation of God, it's a step of grace, is to move into somebody's world. Walk with them even when they're walking the wrong way. Ask them what they're talking about. What's on your mind? You know, I always remember Paul Tillich, the Protestant theologian, who said, most sermons are answers to questions that nobody's asking. So Tillich recommended what he called the method of correlation, to correlate the questions of the time with the answers of the gospel. Well, that's a good instinct for any teacher, preacher, pastoral minister. What are you talking about? What's on your mind? Again, Pope Francis is really good, I think, at emphasizing these motifs. And now the irony continues because it's Christ himself asking the question. Then we hear one of them, named Cleopas, said to him in reply, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have taken place? And then Jesus, well, what things? What are you talking about? And then Cleopas and his friend begin to recount for the Lord himself all the basic details of the life and ministry of Jesus. He was a prophet, mighty in word and deed before God and all the people. Our chief priests and rulers handed him over to a sentence of death, crucified him. We were hoping he'd be the one to redeem Israel. And now, the third day since these things took place, and some women in our group say he's risen from the dead. Now, here's what's extraordinary is they get everything right, don't they? They've got the basic structure of the story. As I would suggest, practically anybody, at least in the West today, would be able to do, right? If you were to ask someone, well, hey, tell me about this Jesus of Nazareth, about Jesus Christ, they'd probably tell you this basic outline. So why are they dejected? Why are they walking the wrong way? Why are they so sad? Because though they have the data, they don't have the meaning. Sometimes you can see all that's there to be seen, but you don't get the pattern. I think I've talked to you before about the cartoons in the New Yorker magazine. I get the New Yorker, and I like it largely for the cartoons. And they're very clever, you know. And 95% of the time, I get the cartoon, why it's funny. But sometimes I'll look at a cartoon, I'll see everything in it. All the characters, their expressions, I'll read the caption. I've seen it all, but like, okay, I don't get it. Why is that funny? And it might take some time before the light goes on. And you get it. But see, getting it doesn't involve seeing any more data. It's not like, oh, I missed that character back in the corner. No, what I come to see is the pattern that links all of this together. Now come back to the story. They got all the details right, all the data right, but they don't have the pattern. And at this point, it's a turning point in the story. At this moment, Jesus, who's been, listening and walking with them in this kind of, non-judgmental way, hearing their point of view, he says, "Oh, how foolish you are. How slow of heart to believe all that the prophet spoke. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Now, notice something, please. We talk about accompaniment, terrific. I'm all in favor of it. We talk about walking with people, listening to them, not being judgmental, not wagging the finger. Yes, I agree with all that. Primacy of grace, yes. But notice, Jesus does not just wander around with these two fellas. He doesn't just walk any way they want to go. At a decisive moment in the process, he begins to teach them. Don't you get it? Don't you see the pattern that the Christ had to undergo suffering so as to enter into his glory? Now they see the pattern of a suffering love that goes all the way down to express the divine mercy and thereby comes to glory. There's the pattern. And then with that in mind, here's for everybody that wants to get more deeply into the scriptures. Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all the scriptures. That's beautiful. And believe me, every one of us who's ever studied the Bible, we would love to have been a fly on the wall at that moment when Jesus himself walks through the entire Old Testament, the law and the prophets, as Moses and the prophets, and lights up how everything in the Old Testament speaks of him, because that's where the pattern was revealed for the first time. That makes sense. So yes, accompaniment, yes, in this very non-intrusive and inviting way, but then at a decisive moment, he begins to teach out of the Bible, revealing the pattern so they would understand who he is. Now, the story intensifies at this point. As they approached the village to which they were going, so they're getting close to Emmaus, he gave the impression that he was just going to be heading on. And they were so enraptured by his teaching that they say, stay with us. So he does, and then famously, they sit down to eat, and Jesus takes bread, and he breaks it. The characteristic Eucharistic gesture. See, remember, what's the Eucharist? What is it? It's God's love unto death. This is my body given for you. This is the chalice of my blood that's shed for you. The Eucharist means suffering so as to enter his glory. The Eucharist means the divine mercy fully expressed. And that's why in that moment of the breaking of the bread, their eyes were opened and they got it. They saw him. The teaching about the Old Testament, the revelation of the pattern, they were starting to see. You bet, they were starting to see. Their hearts were burning within them. Quite right. But then it was in the Eucharistic moment that the pattern was fully revealed to them, and they knew whom they were dealing with. They knew who he was. Everybody walking the wrong way? That's all of us sinners, but especially today, so many walking away from the churches. Jesus comes, and you know what? He might come in your guise. He might come because you walk with somebody. Remember, we're his eyes and his ears and his hands and his feet. So Jesus, maybe it's through you, comes to walk with those who are walking in the wrong direction. He listens, of course. What are you talking about? What's on your mind? But then he breaks open the word. And then he breaks the bread. And in these great liturgical moves, his identity is revealed. That's why, my fellow Catholics, especially listening to me, this is why we have to draw people back to the Mass. I mean, what is this but the Mass? But the Mass, there's the liturgy of the Word, followed by the liturgy of the Eucharist. And in both those moments, it's Christ who is addressing us. Now look how the story ends. They recognized him, but he vanished from their sight. How come he vanished, by the way? Von Balthasar says because he disappears into the mission of the church. It's beautiful, huh? He disappears into their mission. Listen. So they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem. They started going the wrong way. But the encounter with Christ through the Word and through the Eucharist now sends them back in the right direction. Despite the danger of the road, despite the lateness of the hour, despite their fear of what would happen to them in Jerusalem, they go back to the sacred city. At the end of Mass, after we've experienced Christ in the breaking open of the Word and the breaking of the bread, we hear those words, go, go. The Mass has ended. Go. Proclaim the gospel. Glorify the Lord by your life. That's the sending that takes place at the end of this story. How beautiful, by the way, back they go to the 11 in Jerusalem. They return to the church. They return to the church, and there they find their identity and their mission. So, can I urge everybody on this third Sunday of Easter, as we are privileged to read this beautiful story, go back, open your Bibles. Luke chapter 24. This masterpiece within the masterpiece. Let this story wash over you, because you'll find on display all the dynamics of the spiritual life. And God bless you.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron with his Sunday sermon, and it was from last week. Back in a minute.
Lord Rush-Limbaugh is on by the Rush Hawkins Singers is exactly what's called for.
Every day on the EIB.
Rush Limbaugh's On.
This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So I'm reminding you that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.